Hey, what's up, guys? I hope you're enjoying the Be the Difference podcast. If you are, I got a huge favor to ask. Go on to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review for us. It helps us immensely with algorithms and growth because we grow completely by word of mouth, organically. That's why there are no ads. Also, feel free to share this content with somebody you think might get value out of it. Last, if you don't know, I also do coaching to help people become the best version of themselves, starting with physical fitness, going all the way through mindset, sales, and leadership. If you're interested in learning more, there's going to be a link in the description of the podcast. You can schedule a time. It's a free assessment. All I'm going to do is have a conversation with you and see if I can even help you. I look forward to speaking to all of you. Continue to enjoy the podcast, and remember to always be the difference. What's up, everybody? It's Greg Birch with Delta Financial, and this is the Be the Difference podcast. This podcast is all about making you a better person in your life and in your business with coaching on sales, leadership, mindset, marketing, everything under the sun when it comes to being an entrepreneur, and we bring on guest speakers. Today, I've got the honor and pleasure of welcoming Mr. Greg. Is it Greg Wieting?
Greg Wieting, that's it.
Man, I'm a roll with this, man. I've been guessing everyone's last names without checking beforehand, and I've been on like 99% of the time.
my name usually tricks people, so you got it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for those of you that don't know Greg Wieting helps leaders and entrepreneurs heal anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and trauma so that they can lead with bold and courageous hearts. For 2 decades, he's helped hundreds of clients reduce or eliminate their dependence on antidepressants, anxiety, pain, and sleep meds. He addresses the unique causative factors at play beneath your pain, namely the unresolved trauma that causes inflammation, compromises immune function, stagnates emotion, fogs thought, and creates hormonal imbalance. He is the founder of Prisma, a framework overlaying trauma, neuroscience, and energy medicine with somatic and mindfulness-based practices. He developed this while healing his own anxiety, depression, and chronic pain rooted in trauma. This included unraveling a severe spinal curvature and standing 3 inches taller today. It's phenomenal. Greg is a faculty member with the Shift Network. He has spoken at the Institute of Noetic Sciences about energy medicine, the California Institute of Integral Studies about trauma-informed touch, the California Academy of Sciences on neuroplasticity and brain health, and Hive Global Leaders on the intersection of healing, spirituality, and entrepreneurship. Greg's been featured in Elephant Journal, Daily OM, and Gay in America, and has appeared in Mantra Magazine and 24 Life. He has presented and written about trauma-informed healing for the Breathe Network and has been interviewed by Montana Public Radio. That is amazing. I gotta know more about like how you were able to cure your curvature in your spine. That's amazing.
Long journey of healing. And, what I share with my clients today is precisely how I've healed myself. And yeah, my goal is to really help people break through upper limits, right? And to live into their potential, to clear out the subterranean patterns of trauma that would otherwise keep people stuck, that will otherwise sabotage performance. A lot of the leaders and entrepreneurs I work with are very purpose-driven. They're very mission-driven, but they lack fulfillment. They've reached a point where their hustle and their drive is catching up with them. And they're realizing that maybe they're leading from a trauma response. And so my work is to really help reverse engineer that process so people can show up just more authentically as themselves. And not only is that helping with performance and helping people, just do better at life, it's helping people just free themselves up, creating more space to just be themselves.
Yeah, that's very much like almost releasing the past and kind of living in the present, like being more part of their being now instead of living in this past trauma or living in that really does affect a lot of pieces of your health, your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health.
Yeah. Well, an unconscious way to heal is to reenact old patterns. And it's
Mhm,
an unconscious pathway, but it'll get us into a lot of trouble because we just continue to perpetuate a lot of these cycles of harm and wounding that
mhm.
really long for loving attention and to be resolved. And that could be a messy road unless we have the right support beside us. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, especially in the workplace, I'd say that workplace stress is really a public health risk at this point because chronic stress leads to chronic illness.
Mhm.
And yeah, our mental health is at stake. And, a lot of folks I'm working with anxiety and depression, there's just so much stigma around mental health because people think that something's wrong with them. And what I like to do is take a step back and say that actually, we're living in these environments that are perpetuating, chronic stress. So our anxiety and depression is in fact a healthy response to an unhealthy environment. And so, this hustle culture and burnout, I think what a lot of folks are seeing when we're seeing all of this, a lot of folks leaving the workplace to kind of create their own pathways is a lot of these environments are not sustainable. And so there's some change that can happen within organizations, but if you don't have that buy-in from organizations, there's only so much healing you can do for yourself when you're in an unhealthy environment. So then a lot of folks are choosing to leave those unhealthy environments and create environments that are more conducive to support our humanity, to support wellness, to support connection, to support cohesion, and supportive environments that really are centering our humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to how you discovered this, talk about your start and how you were able to identify this within yourself in order to overcome this and be able to share this with other people and change their lives.
Sure. Yeah, if you met me 30 years ago, I was suffering from debilitating chronic pain, anxiety, depression. It was just hard to function. It was hard to get out of bed. That included a severe curve in my spine. So throughout college and high school, I mostly just self-medicated with alcohol because that's what I did to get by. And as a kid, I had chronic ear infections and strep throat, and there was nothing I wanted more than to go to a doctor and take an antibiotic and get better. I just wanted someone to fix me. So when I got out of college, I realized that medicating with alcohol wasn't going to be a long-term solution for me. So I was really just steps away from antidepressants and pain meds because I thought that was going to be my path.
Mhm.
Um, and I was actually introduced to the world of energy medicine and healing by serendipity. I had a friend who was a massage therapist, and she offered me a massage. At the time, I was living in so much chronic pain, I did not want a massage. Physical touch was just too painful. And she introduced me to the world of energy medicine. She said, we can just work, we don't even have to work hands on, we can work hands off. This was completely foreign to me. At that point, I maybe had read a book on meditation and mindfulness, but I didn't really have any background in, alternative healthcare or holistic healing. But I had implicit trust with her. And, I really, at that point, I had nothing to lose. And I think there's a lot of folks right now who, they've tried everything under the sun and they're still in pain and they just don't have a whole lot to lose. So there's more people who are open to new alternatives because people are hungry for healing. And I realized the moment I started receiving from her that I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for. At that point, I was just out of college. All I knew was my pain body. My entire life, I just had this chronic pain. It was all I knew. I didn't know that there could be anything other than that. And that first session with her, I got a glimpse of that. And it was really the recognition that I'm not my pain. And that's a lot of the work that helps people heal is the mind training to recognize that we're not our pain, we're not our wounding. But that mind training is, it takes practice, that mental toughness, that grit, that resilience. It's just like going to the gym to strengthen a muscle.
Mm.
That is another muscle, our mind. It takes time and practice. So I had that first glimpse that I'm not my pain. And so within a year, I started to study energy medicine nonstop. I found a teacher and worked with her for 4 years consistently. She introduced me to the world of meditation. So I found myself then moving to India for 8 months and started to deepen into a meditation and a mindfulness based practice that also then opened me up to the world of somatics, which is really starting to understand and access the intelligence of the body. You think of a bird that flies into a window and drops to the ground, it's in shock. It's just lying on the ground, frozen. You think it's dead, even, but it just hasn't been able to absorb the shock of flying into the window. And so that happens to us. We are carrying so much pain in our physical bodies that we just lose access to our bodies. We're living from the neck up. And so somatics is helping us to come back into bodily experience and thaw out the patterns of trauma that have us frozen, that have us, not able to really feel ourselves and be in touch with our agency and our power and our presence. Mm-hmm. So as I was in India those 8 months, my spine was unraveling and this patterns of pain were falling away. I came back to the States and started to study energy medicine. And through that work, that introduced me to the world of trauma and neuroscience. Over the last 20 years, I've been intuitively teaching everything that has had value in my own healing path and have reverse engineered that to create a really practical and accessible approach to healing that really helps put the power of healing back into the hands of each and every individual. So my goal is to really democratize and demystify healing to make it as accessible as possible.
This is fascinating, and it reminds me a little bit about the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Have you read that?
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me a lot of this book, which I just recently got through, and the amount of time that we spend as individuals thinking about the past or focused on that future, which is still like it's outside of time, it's outside of now, right? But it almost always causes us to live in a perpetual like negative state, either fear, anxiety, stress, pain, that can perpetuate because we become almost like it becomes a custom, right? And it's very difficult to release that and just enjoy the moment, because that's the only thing that's real, is the right now and living in the moment. That's like what, as you're speaking, this seems very familiar from like the energy standpoint of being able to almost identify that. For you, from your perspective of, you studied this for many years, how difficult was it to kind of to open up your mind to this, and like you mentioned, going to the gym and like lifting weights, like it was difficult at first, like you had to get used to it. What was that process like?
And that's the gift of energy medicine. It's helping us bypass the brain, because I think so many people who are struggling with mental health, with anxiety or depression or chronic pain, are coming at their desire to heal from this left brain dominant place. And to your point, left brain dominance is past and future oriented. Mm-hmm. And right brain intuition is more present moment awareness. So my experience with energy medicine is it helps to cut through or break through the noise to help us land in present moment awareness. So it helps to bypass the brain that is usually trying to figure everything out, come up with answers, get to the bottom of it, right? It's very goal oriented. It has an agenda. It wants to fix, it wants to solve, it wants to be in control. And energy medicine helps us bypass that part of the brain and drop into a deeper place of wisdom. Some of its, functions are to calm the cardiovascular system, regulate the nervous system, strengthen immune system function, which are all really important to support healing. But really, it's helping us just connect with our innate wisdom. Innate wisdom is a term that was developed in the world of chiropractic decades ago. But if we get a paper cut there's a healing intelligence within us that heals that paper cut despite us. So it can be healing that paper cut while we're having this conversation, while I'm working this afternoon, while I'm at the gym tonight, while I'm sleeping. And that healing mechanism is sending platelets and proteins and orchestrating all these biochemical transmissions without us having to think about it. So, trauma and wounding and pain, trauma is really any lived experience where we feel isolated, alone, unsupported. It could be a life experience that is too much too soon, too much too long, or not enough for too long. And that pattern of trauma disrupts our connection to our innate wisdom. We start to feel fragmented and split within ourselves. We're no longer experiencing ourselves in wholeness. So the function of energy medicine is to just reconnect us to that innate wisdom. So in that sense, I have found that, my journey to healing has been really supported with practices and tools that make healing a happening and not a doing. And so in that sense, there's an ease to healing because we're not forcing healing, but we're creating the climate for healing to happen. With that said, healing can be a long and windy road, and there's no quick fixes. When I
Mm.
speak to potential clients and students, this isn't an overnight fix. We're building practices that support us through a lifetime. And life will still throw curveballs. Life isn't easy, but we have more tools and more awareness and more skill to respond to life with more awareness and with more presence and with more capacity. And so I think that's where a lot of folks come to me after they've tried everything under the sun. A lot of folks, because I kind of work in that overlay or that the interplay between anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. Talking about our pain activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight flight response, and will lend itself to making the pain more chronic. So folks who are suffering from chronic pain, who have gone through traditional talk therapy, and they've found that their pain has actually gotten worse, find that there's just a freedom in healing with energy medicine because we get to bypass the brain and reconnect to that innate wisdom without having to think our way through it.
Mhm.
And I think people find a lot of relief that way because, yeah, this left brain dominant world we live in, we're so conditioned to have an answer for everything and force and will and effort our way through everything. And the path of healing through energy medicine is very contrary to that. And that can at first feel counterintuitive, but once we start to get the feel for that, we derive a lot of freedom and a lot of aliveness from it.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I'm on my own kind of a journey of mindfulness now. I started doing meditation daily, and like we both had discussed just a second ago, is the challenge when you're starting new, right? And like having to get into that state and teach yourself over time to let go of the conscious mind, or the I almost like the unconscious mind that's constantly trying to solve problems or brute force its way into solving or accepting this. And so what I found is that there's probably, I would say, a very large majority of people that don't do this. Like, they're not used to it, right? They're not used to tapping into that part of their brain. They're not used to meditation or releasing the past, the present, and living in the now. What are some strategies or some recommendations that you could give to somebody that's like looking just to start some meditation
Yeah.
in order to get more in tune with their own energy and with their own self, their own being?
Yeah. The mind is a tricky thing to get to know, especially when we have trauma on the brain. It can feel like we're navigating, landmines and,
Absolutely.
detonate when we least expect it. And so I think it's really important to have a guide. I think as mammals, we're social creatures. We're not meant to live in isolation. We're certainly not meant to heal in isolation. So much of healing is relational because so much of our wounding has happened relationally. So a lot of the repair happens through relationship by dissolving these patterns of alienation and isolation that have us feeling separate from the whole.
Mhm.
So much of healing is this restoring our connection to the whole. So I think having a guide is a really important piece. And also shopping around. There is no one right or wrong way to meditate or heal. With that said, there's some meditation practices that may do more harm than good for folks that are navigating trauma. And
Mm,
so, a trauma informed approach to meditation is giving options. I'm often giving trauma informed side notes to my students because I'll offer invitations, but say this invitation actually may not work for you because of A, B, and C. So if not, here's some other options. So I think it's important to know that there's no, I think a common concern is, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? And again, giving options so people can find their own knack for meditation. There is no one right or wrong way.
mm.
And so helping people discover the orientation to the practice that fits them and meets them where they're at. And again, I think so many people get hung up on a particular technique or practice, where my work is really around creating the climate for people to find their own relationship to themselves and their own relationship to, meditation that is meaningful and that can evolve with each individual instead of sticking to one fixed practice. So having some flexibility and being able to experiment again, just like the same thing with, seeking out a therapist or a healer or a teacher or a mentor. You sometimes need to shop around, just like when you're dating. You're going to kiss a lot of frogs before you find, the right fit.
Mm.
So not giving up, because some people may try one meditation practice that doesn't work for them and think, oh, meditation's not for me. It's like, no, just that one practice wasn't right for you. So keep trying.
That's really astute. Like it's very powerful because you're right. There's so many different types and forms of meditation, and man, that is almost profound to think about how trauma is something that's happens, in relation with others, and to go through the healing process, you should do it in relation with others and find a guide. I never thought about it like that, but that's really powerful.
Well, and that's the paradox too, because so much of healing is just developing a robust relationship from ourselves to ourselves
Yeah.
and resting in our aloneness, which is the presence of ourselves. Yet when we do that in community, even though we're developing a relationship with ourselves, we get to do that with fellow travelers.
Mhm.
And so we're developing, I love Osho said something like loneliness is the absence of the other and aloneness is the presence of oneself. So we can grow in the presence of oneself actually while also having fellow travelers by our side. And I don't want to recreate the wheel. Like, I mean, for me, I traveled to India. Part of my journey, I was in South America. I've been to Asia. I've studied with indigenous teachers, and I've traveled the world to find what works for me. And that was really important. But I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I was drawing from established wisdoms and then making them my own and then overlaying them into a way that's meaningful. So, in my program, I share dozens of somatic and mindfulness based practices. And the invitation is take it or leave it. And so, the dozens of practices I've shared have all had value for me, but they may not all have value for each student, and so students get to decide that for themselves.
Is this something that you feel is something that needs to be done more or better in person, or can it be done remotely? Like do you have clients that you sit with? I'm just kind of curious about that. Is it something that you feel is more powerful when you do in the presence of?
Well, that's the thing. Presence is non-local. I'm
Okay.
present here with you now, and so yeah. So all of my students and clients I work with remotely. That was even before the pandemic, and so yeah, we're able to just be in presence with one another, and that's really powerful to have a non-local community. I think it's important to have local community and support and in-person support as well. But to be able to tap into, a much broader community, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. Um, So talk. I want to hear more about your travels and just your experiences. Like that. That to me is fantastic. That you just. I mean, you came out of college and you know shortly afterwards you're going into this energy medicine and you're learning about it and you just travel. Like, what was that like from the time that you just said, "I'm gonna go do this"? You know, how much planning did you just drop everything? You know, me thinking about it, I'm like, man, it'd be difficult for me to just do that, right? And I'm sure that a lot of people feel that way.
Um, my first trip to India, at that point, I'd spent 4 years working in the nonprofit world and, again, was very mission driven. I
Mm,
was very passionate about my work. And yet, on my path to quote unquote save the world, really was destroying myself. So, the level of burnout and, how that was aggravating my anxiety and my depression and my chronic pain. But by serendipity was also learning Reiki at this point, and then was introduced to the world of meditation. And again, there's something of just about the serendipity of just following just a natural progression of life. I had this curiosity about spending time in India and was doing some research around that. And then, literally, yeah, everyone in the organization I was at was laid off. And it just created this natural pause in my professional life that, yeah, it was just an easy option to take a bigger pause and, yeah, spend time in India. And then, when I came back from India, I had been in Montana for 8 years. I've lived all over the country, and I just had reached a point where I realized that my time in India, or my time in Montana, had been perfect. It's a very special place. I hold it near and dear to my heart,
mm,
but I was feeling the call to be in a more urban environment that was more diverse and more queer, and yet also wasn't really sure where that was going to be. And so I, yeah, just had space to, and I had some callings to kind of check out some things in Hawaii and then check out some things in South America. And so, yeah, my life has always afforded me just the spaciousness to kind of follow the calling of my heart, which I think that's really part of the path of healing too, is to be able to trust what is not just linear and logical, but, yeah, to trust a deeper calling within my heart. And I think that's very much the work I help my clients and students, just to, live in a deeper trust and to live in a deeper alignment with what is true to oneself.
mhm.
And that could be counterintuitive to what we have maybe been conditioned to think is the right path for us in this world. But I found every time I listen to that calling, the rewards pay back, tenfold, if not more.
Yeah, very much. Oh man, Michael Singer in the same vein. Michael Singer, like the surrender experiment, kind of. You just like you have the end state of where you want to go, and a lot of people feel like, oh, well, this is the path I'm going to go, and they try to brute force their way down the path. But when you just kind of are open to the opportunities or the signs that life sends you, which may not feel at the time that's going to take you where you want to go, but the route it takes you actually gets you there faster, maybe a roundabout, but it also like just unfolds with some beautiful experiences that are just extremely more fulfilling or have a lot more success than you ever imagined possible when you just kind of surrender to those signs in the pathways that life opens up to you.
Yeah, I think there's something about being open to life,
Yeah.
um, and and again, being open to life wasn't my natural approach to life. It was quite the opposite. But my pain had brought me to my knees, and where I was really forced to explore a different life that then helped me develop that capacity to trust in life and to follow these eddies and currents and, just listen. I think healing is very much about a deep listening.
Mm.
that we are so often overriding from this, yeah, this brain, this logical brain that has checklists and to-do lists and all these ideas of what should be. Um, and I think that's what our mindfulness practice helps us explore is how not to reject or fight against what is, how to actually be in loving acceptance of what is, even if what is our pain. And that's, again, another counterintuitive teaching, but this is how I help clients who have chronic pain 10 out of 10 drop it to 2 or 3 out of 10 within a matter of months, is learning how to not fight against the pain, to not make the pain bad or wrong, to understand that the pain actually has messages for us. And how do we use that pain to get more in touch with the truth of who we are, to work with that, to have just a deeper understanding of who we are, which helps us better understand just the nature of life itself. And yeah, I think a lot of possibility opens up from that place of receptivity.
Yes, absolutely. And you come back from India. How long after you come back do you decide to do you have the calling to start your business and start serving and helping others?
Yeah, by the time I got back from India, I had met a few other energy medicine practitioners and teachers when I was in India, and I had already had all my certification prior to going to India. So as soon as I got back from India, I started to teach energy medicine, but then I started to dive into the world of yoga and Ayurveda. I started to study another form of energy medicine called body talk, which, yeah, is was developed by an osteopath, chiropractor, acupuncturist, which is just has really far-reaching applications as a complete healthcare system. And so, yeah, I was then starting to overlay energy medicine, yoga, and Ayurveda together. And then as I moved to San Francisco, that's when I started to develop kind of this lens of trauma and neuroscience. One of my first students, I was teaching a 6-month program called the Resilience Project. And one of my students was a psychotherapist, and she said, you're really teaching a trauma informed approach to healing. At that point, I didn't really have that language, trauma informed. I knew I was healing my own trauma and helping other people do the same. And she was a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And so she invited me to join her as her teacher's assistant. She was teaching the trauma course in the integrative counseling psychotherapy, ICP, counseling psychotherapy department, to teach mindfulness-based practices to the students to help them better embody, the course material.
Mhm.
So that's when I started to develop my trauma and neuroscience roadmap. So, all these years, that was 9 years ago. So the last 9 years, I've just then reverse engineered all of the teachings that I had been piecing together really intuitively to support my own healing, and have been able to codify that into, the 7 Prisma pillars, which are kind of the drop pins on this roadmap to healing. Again, to really democratize and demystify healing. I went to years of healers and therapists without even knowing what the nervous system was. And so if I just had this basic knowledge and understanding of what the nervous system was, well, it would have helped me release a lot of shame around my triggers, because I would have had a better understanding of the functioning of my brain and the nervous system.
Mm.
Um, and it would have better equipped me to, take some of that healing, the power of that healing, into my own hands. And so, yeah, that's Prisma today, is a trauma and neuroscience roadmap that includes the 7 Prisma pillars, that really help guide people on a path from pain to purpose, that overlays the somatic and mindfulness-based practices that I guide online 3 times a month. And then the entire energy medicine training program, which are 9 full-day retreats online, course spanned out over the course of a year. So students have a full year access to the program. They'll usually go through the course material within the first 3 months, but I'm always cautioning folks to take healing slow, to not force it, to not move too fast. And that even if you have really good results within the first few months, take the full year to really synthesize and absorb all the material, to really take it to heart. We're creating new neural pathways. We're creating new behavioral patterns. We're creating new thought patterns. And that's really the work of a lifetime. My one student recently, he was in a 3-month cohort in a different program where he came in with a 10 out of 10 pain. And within the 3 months, it got down to a 3 out of 10. He's actually a medical doctor, a pain management doctor, but he couldn't manage his own pain with surgery or meds. And so when he got his pain down to 3 out of 10 in those first 3 months, he said, "What now?" And I said, "Well, you just keep practicing. You just keep reapplying all the practices you've learned. And that just continues to help you get to know yourself more deeply." Because one of his other questions, or one of his other realizations through the work, was realizing that there's a big connection to spirit within the work. And I said, yeah, we can't really take spirit out of the equation. Thinking in Chinese medicine, the Shen is the light that shines through the eyes. But the understanding is it's one light that is shining through all of our eyes. So holding some of these frameworks and understandings helps us feel connected to the whole, which again is an antidote to the alienation of our times, which helps to heal the patterns of trauma that have us feeling split and separate from the whole.
Yeah, that is powerful. This is great. I love this. This is great. So you started to describe a little bit about your system and your process and how you help others and how you help them on the path of healing. Break down a little bit for those of, I'm sure there's going to be people in the audience that are listening to this that this resonates with, and maybe they're interested in learning more. Talk about how your program's kind of broken down, and how, if somebody were to start from new, what they could expect.
Sure. Yeah, so the Prisma pillars and the roadmap is delivered through an online course that is 8 modules, and that's all pre-recorded material along with workbooks. So that's some of the thought work that helps to create kind of the intellectual understanding of kind of this road to healing. And that starts with trauma foundations, just developing an understanding of trauma, the brain, the body, the nervous system. And then some somatic and mindfulness-based practices that are paired with that material. And then each module thereafter is one of the Prisma pillars. So we start with nervous system regulation. How do we help to regulate the nervous system to locate psychological safety and trust? The second pillar is embodiment. So how do we stop living from the neck up and start to come into bodily experience, which is really where we access presence and agency when we have the capacity to feel ourselves. The third pillar is emotional attunement. So how do we harness the power of emotion, and human connection? So it's really understanding the anatomy of emotion and understanding the message that longs to be communicated and the needs that long to be met beneath our emotions. So we can really harness the power of our emotions in really meaningful ways. And that's going to help us with communication and how we can diffuse conflict, and really then that bridge where healing is first, an awareness of self, and then healing is an awareness of self in relationship to the other. The fourth pillar is orientation, which is really values alignment. And not only understanding our values, they're derived from the most emotionally charged experiences of our lives. And so sometimes they can be in conflict. So getting clear on what our values are, and then really starting to understand how are we leaning into the fulfillment of our values. And this is like a cost payoff analysis between motivation and inspiration, because we're often, fear-based motivation is what we're motivated to get away from. There's value in that, but to live just solely from motivation is definitely going to lead to burnout. So what are we inspired to move towards? And sometimes when people are in a lot of pain, I call it kind of the trenches of their wounding and their pain. You're in the pit and you can't even see out to a horizon of possibility, much less have an understanding of, what's at the horizon and how to get there. So that's a lot of that work. And that's kind of a shift from, understanding victim consciousness, survivor consciousness, and thriver consciousness, and how we can move through those parts of our lived experience to live into, greater possibility. Narration is the fifth pillar. So this is really flipping the script on the subconscious beliefs and behaviors that are often, sabotaging. You know,
So powerful, by the way,
yeah,
about how
big
we speak to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, the conscious mind is 5%. What we think we believe is the conscious mind. It's like 5%. What we really believe is the subconscious and unconscious mind. And those are the behaviors and beliefs organized around trauma and wounding that literally are stored in our body. So I use a whole body psychology map so you can start to identify beliefs and behaviors in relationship to different body parts. And again, that helps with the work in the attunement module because we get to then reparent those parts of ourselves that have these protective guarding strategies that are designed to save and protect us, but are really keeping us stuck and playing life small. So then how do we flip the script to really expand the aperture of possibility and live into a new story? Identity is the sixth pillar, and that's really starting to dissolve identification with wounding. We work with, attachment styles there to understand that that's really not the truth of who we are. And so it's really developing self inquiry practices to become more in touch with the truth of who we are that is not obscured by the imprints of our past or the stagnation of emotion or trauma that is really trying to keep us stuck and static. So who we are is really dynamic process and change. And then the last pillar is impact or purpose, really shifting an understanding of purpose from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. So it's not so much what we do, but who we are. And really understanding our place in the cosmic order is really coming from a place of presence. So with each of those pillars, there's dozens of somatic and mindfulness-based practices that are paired with them. So folks go through that course of study on their own, and then 3 times a month, I lead a guided practice to deepen into all of the somatic and mindfulness-based practices that are paired with the teachings of the Prisma pillars. And then on select Fridays, this Friday is actually one of the energy medicine trainings. So then there's an entire Reiki 1, 2, and 3 trauma informed energy medicine training. So I really look at the energy medicine as the vehicle we need for healing, because energy medicine is what's going to flush out the inflammation that is stored in the body from the stagnation of emotion that is trauma, which is compromising the immune system, which is, throwing our nervous system off, our heart rate off, throwing off our hormonal balance. And so the energy medicine is really helping to flush all of that out of the body and help us, again, break up the noise. It's helping us connect back to that innate wisdom. And so those are 9 workshops throughout the course of the year. So people learn an entire healing system that then they can apply, beside the somatic and mindfulness-based practices and the Prisma pillars. So it's really just a comprehensive step-by-step pathway to healing for people who want to heal themselves, who want to have just a deepening practice, on top of maybe some of the support they're already receiving, or they found that, I just talked to someone the other day who I've had a handful of folks who've come to me after doing years of cognitive behavioral therapy, but they've reached a plateau because they realize that they're not fully addressing the impacts of trauma as it's stored in the body. And so that's where Prisma is really powerful. There's just some pain we can't think or talk our way through. So that's where I come in to help people.
Yeah, there's only so much that the mind can actually try to solve for you. That's absolutely true. And as I'm listening to this, I'm actually super interested in this, by the way. Like as you talk about, I'm like, man, this is something that I could probably go through. If only just to release more of the past and the focus and the grind towards the future and being more present
Yeah.
and changing that perspective. And I what my experience has been, with coaching entrepreneurs and sales professionals, and then myself and my experiences, um, we're almost always the people that are held back from that success that they really desire, that they feel should be able to achieve, or they want to achieve, that is desired so much. It's almost always pain that's rooted in limiting beliefs, some kind of emotional, mental trauma that's rooted in some kind of subconscious or limiting beliefs that's really deep rooted, and so usually prevents and entrepreneurs from even starting. Where like they want to, they have this desire, but they're so fearful of will they be able to make it, right? Because it has to do with those past failures or the past. It's not even like a fear of failure. It's more like a fear of judgment, you know, of what how they're going to feel about themselves. Fear, like the way they'll judge themselves or how others will judge them. And I think this is a powerful system and process and program that you've developed that can help. That's very helpful for entrepreneurs of almost any industry. So there's probably going to be people that want to reach out or want to connect with you and learn more. And so, what would be the area or the best place to connect with you to learn more and see if this is something that could fit for them?
Sure. Yeah, gregwhiting.com. There's information on how folks work with me, both one-on-one and through the Prisma course and community. And it all starts with a phone call. We schedule a discovery call. You apply, and I ask you a bunch of questions because I want to get to really know where you're at, where you want to be, what are you struggling with, what have you tried to help, has it worked, what do you want instead, how hungry are you for that. I really only work with people who are highly committed because it takes commitment, and I want results.
Yes.
I'm all about win-wins, and so I'm inviting people to work with me who are hungry for change, who are hungry for growth, who really want to break through those upper limits, who really want support. I think big dreams take big support. And, again, trauma often will teach us that we have to do everything on our own, this hyper vigilance and this hyper independence. And the fact of the matter is we can't, or we can, but it's going to have a cost.
Mm.
And so, yeah, folks who are ready to break that pattern and who are ready to get support. So we schedule a discovery call, and we're really, I'm actually vetting if it's a good fit, because I'm going to only invite folks on who, I feel really confident that we can do spectacular work together, and that I feel really confident in the arc of transformation that's possible.
Mm.
And so we're sussing each other out to see if that's a fit or not.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's the way it should be. Anytime you're doing any kind of coaching, you always want to make sure that's a good fit on both sides, because that person's a walking representation of your brand and your processes. And if they're not willing to put into work and they don't have any improvement, that's like, well, does Greg's process really work? It's like, yeah, it does if you do the work. So that you having that process, and this is just for all the audience listening. When it comes to having a coach in any sense, in any way, you have to be willing to do that work on a whatever you're paying for or going into, and you have to be committed, right? Committed to the change, committed to going through the process, the challenges that are going to come about from doing it. So, thank you so much, Greg, for jumping on and sharing this. This has been a powerful podcast. I find I'm having a lot of podcasts that are centered around like this kind of like metaphysics, energy, law of attraction, manifestation kind of stuff. And I love it. I love talking about it. It's been very intriguing for me, and I've been on a road discovery. I started buying a bunch of books. I bought a bunch of Deepak Chopra books and Joe Dispenza Joe Dispenza books, and I started to like dig into this because it's fascinating to me. The concept of energy and almost like releasing into the universe. And so, thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking part and jumping on. The last question I always ask everybody, all my guests, is you have the opportunity to sit with, learn from, have a conversation with, um, break bread with three individuals, anyone in history, alive or deceased. Who would those three be and why?
Mm. Um, it's a good question. Yeah, I'd say Dalai Lama for sure.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'd say probably some of the, yeah, well, actually, and I've had a chance to sit with one teacher, Lama Tsultram. I'm not pronouncing her name correctly, but um, she's in Colorado, and yeah, deeply steeped in Buddhist teachings. I'm not Buddhist at all, but there's just for her just the level of her presence is really powerful. And Pema Chodron, which I'm also not pronouncing her name correctly, but just sitting in her presence. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Those are all three unique ones. I haven't heard any of them. So thank you so much for jumping on. For those of you who are watching, if you search within yourself, it is not uncommon. In fact, it's I would say it's like 99% of the population is living in some kind of past trauma, some kind of past pain that is affecting you, either just emotionally, mentally, and physically, and it's affecting your ability to succeed, is affecting your ability to move forward. And so this is something that if you really listen to and you search yourself, I think this is a way forward for you. And you should definitely, I highly recommend reaching out to Greg and seeing if this is something that makes sense for you. And if you got value from listening to this conversation, if you learned anything, if you grew, then I ask you to do one thing: share this content with somebody else that can also learn from it, that can also grow, and potentially also change their life by reaching out to Greg and removing that pain from their mind and from their soul. This has been the Be the Difference podcast. I'm your host, Greg Birch. Until next time, we'll see you.